Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, again. So we need to try to introduce someone who doesn't really need an introduction. It's a bit hard. But just to remind people that Alexander Downer, of course, has had a distinguished public career, culminating, of course, as a Foreign Minister or maybe High Commissioner to the UK, I don't know. But he was Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, Member of Parliament from 1984 to 2008. He assumed the role as the High Commissioner in March 2014 and will finish sometime this year. For the last year, I suppose, we've had, whether it's lunches like this or other functions, we've been having events talking about two fairly major political events in the last little while. Firstly, of course, there was the US election, and well, not firstly. In fact, Brexit. The Brexit vote was before that, wasn't it? So there, in terms of focusing your mind on, and particularly for us in this part of the world, and for different reasons, focusing the mind, the Brexit vote, the US presidential result, and then of course the UK election, which surprised more than just a few people, have made us all think down here. And we've had people like Daniel Hannan speak here on Brexit. We've had various events on the US election and what it means for this part of the world, or at least for Australia anyway. I think one of the questions asked was, could it happen here? And I think the view was because of the different political system, it wouldn't happen here, a result like they had in the US. And then we had an economist here a couple of weeks ago talking again about the Brexit story and what it means for this part of the world, not only Australia but Southeast Asia and so forth. So I'm delighted that Alexander Downer has accepted my invitation to join us today and talk around some of these issues. He'll talk for about 20 minutes or so, then there'll be questions. There are TV cameras here and we are also filming it, so I'll just remind you of that. So please welcome Alexander Downer.
Well, thanks, Greg, very much. And let me say what a great pleasure it is for me to be back in Sydney again and to be, more broadly, as you might say, back home. When you live overseas, which I haven't done since I was a student, and you come back home, there's that delightful sense that you've never been away. And I mean that in more ways than one, obviously, not just physically, but so many of the debates here are just the same as they've been since I can almost remember. We've been having a huge debate over lunch here about the constant preoccupation in Australia with opinion polls. One observation I can bring to you from the United Kingdom is that these things, opinion polls, which you may obsess about, can change and change very fast, because public opinion in the age of mass media, and in particular historically high levels of education, never has the public been as educated as it is now, can lead to a higher degree of political volatility. So for a political party that's ahead in the polls, as the Conservative Party was by miles just 3 months ago, you can't be 100% sure that's going to deliver when the election comes. Or the Labour parties in the UK was polling less than 30%. At the beginning of an election campaign, which was in late April of this year, and their polling today is, I don't know, something like 45%, nearly 20% more. So that would be the first thing that I'd say to you if you wish to obsess with polls. They can shift incredibly quickly when circumstances suddenly change. So what we've seen in the UK while I've been there, and of course it's not a related event, is really quite a substantial upheaval. I arrived in the middle of 2014, and in September 2014 they had the Scottish referendum, which was closer than many people had expected. The Remain vote winning 55 to 45. And then there was a general election which people thought would lead to a hung parliament, which the Conservatives won outright. And then there was the Brexit referendum, which everyone thought would go to Remain but went to Leave. And then there was the general election I've just referred to. where everyone thought the Conservatives would end up with a majority of between 60 and 100 seats, and they ended up with a minority. They survived, but they ended up in a minority dependent on the support of a Northern Irish Conservative political party. So what does all this, first of all, say? As I said, it does show an electorate which is volatile, but it doesn't show an electorate which is necessarily opposed to globalisation, which is the narrative that you continually get. I don't think there is a lot of evidence that people in the United Kingdom are going around and talking about the evils of globalisation. So, for example, the claim that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer in the UK is actually not the case. That in fact over the last 10 years the reverse has been true, and the Gini coefficient that measures the equity of wealth distribution in countries has, if you're in favour of more equitable wealth distribution, improved during the last 10 years. So I don't think there is a lot of evidence that what you're seeing is a sort of radical evolution of opinion in the United Kingdom. And after all, if I could make this point to you, the government of the United Kingdom is led by the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party is arguably the oldest continuous and most significant political party in the Western world, and is also, in many respects, a great pillar of the British establishment. It is the party of the establishment. The party which traditionally has opposed it, the Labour Party, for the last 100 or so years, has been the dominant, sometimes opposition, sometimes governing party. And between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party at the last British election, they obtained well over 80%, 82.5% to be precise, 82.5% of the vote. So I don't think you are seeing a swing in the United Kingdom towards some sort of new phenomenon, as is sometimes suggested. So it begs the question, is Brexit then the great earthquake that it's often said to be? So I'm not obviously going to get into the whether it's good or bad for Brexit to occur. We, the Australian government, said that we thought it would be best for Europe if the United Kingdom remained in the European Union, because we did take the view at the time that the United Kingdom, with its force projection capability, its commitment to liberal economics and liberal trade, its caused great affinity with our own country and its involvement in the heritage of this country, would make for a stronger, more outward-looking, more transatlantic, more internationally engaged European Union than would be the case without the United Kingdom. But the public have voted to leave. They voted to leave an organisation, though, that history shows they felt uncomfortable with right from the beginning. Britain was slow in getting into the European Union. When it got into the European Union, it was always looking for opt-outs. And most importantly, the United Kingdom opted out of the so-called Schengen arrangement, which is an arrangement for borderless travel, and they opted out of the most important of all, they opted out of the euro. The euro not only being the single currency, but the great symbol of greater European integration. I think the British people always saw the European Union as advantageous in terms of advancing their economic interests, their trade and investment interests, their commercial interests, but they never signed up to, if you like, the heart of Europe, which isn't actually about economics. It's about never again. It's about ever closer union of the now 28, about to be 27 countries of the European Union. They don't like to use the term in the European Union of a supranational state, but there's something of a suggestion that that is the ultimate ambition of many of the leaders of the European Union. The British never really signed up to this vision, and indeed in David Cameron's renegotiation in 2016 with the European Union, one of the agreements he got was that the British would opt out of the notion of ever closer union. As somebody who was a British ambassador to the EU once said to me, we, the British, always seem to be somewhat on a path to leave the European Union in any case. Now, you know, whether that's true or not, when it came to the referendum, there were the hardcore people who were really in favour of leaving the European Union, saw the European Union as an invasion of British sovereignty, didn't like the way that British couldn't control their own borders because citizens of the European Union can come and live and work and retire within the United Kingdom, and there had been a huge upsurge in the British population. There were all of those arguments. There was a smaller number of people who were passionate Europeanists, and there was quite a big chunk of the British public that thought, I don't really like the European Union very much, but gosh, I think it might be a bit risky to leave. I guess enough of those people thought they would take the risk, and so the British are now engaged in the negotiations to leave. You know, I am trying to persuade people while I'm here that the United Kingdom isn't part of some so-called populist revolution that is apparently happening around the world and threatening the very stability of our planet. I don't even believe that hypothesis myself. If I could go so far as expressing a personal opinion, not the opinion of the Australian government, but maybe they don't believe that hypothesis either, I don't know. But I can say in the United Kingdom, what you're seeing with Brexit is consistent with a sceptical view that the British have had all along about the European Union, for right or for wrong. I'm not making a judgment about that. So what does this all mean for us? Well, our relationship with the United Kingdom has roots that you well know. I have a line that in the last 230 years, the British people have achieved a large number of things, many of them very great. Seeing off the Kaiser, seeing off the Nazis, great champions of liberal democracy and so on. But their greatest single achievement was the creation of modern Australia. And I don't know that they all quite sign up to that, but I say, look, call me biased. I am an Australian. I was born in Australia. And by the way, unequivocally an Australian. I was born in Australia, so were my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, so I have no rights to another passport. But seriously, I accept that I'm biased. But, you know, we have those deep roots in the United Kingdom. What is interesting today is the way the people-to-people contacts are so strongly maintained. Something like 1 million Australians a year visit the United Kingdom, and goodness knows how many Australians live in the United Kingdom. It's very hard to judge, but perhaps 300,000 or so. And there are Australians in prominent positions in the United Kingdom in all sorts of different roles, particularly in business, but there are High Court judges, there are politicians. I mean, here is quite an amusing anecdote. There's a Scottish National Party member for Edinburgh, North and Leith. And this Scottish National Party member was born in Perth. She grew up, Perth of course is in Scotland, no, Perth, Western Australia. She grew up in Western Australia. She became an actress. She was even in one episode of Home and Away. She went on a holiday to Scotland, met a man there, fell in love, got married to him, and he was an SNP activist. And so this Aussie girl, still entirely Australian, became an SNP Member of Parliament and is campaigning for Scottish independence to this very day. One of Jeremy Corbyn's close colleagues is an MP for that part of London called Catherine West. And Catherine, she comes from here. She comes from Manly. I think her father was a member of the Liberal Party. Catherine is definitely not a member of the Conservative Party. She's a member of the Labor Party. A wonderful person, though, by the way. Completely Australian, went to school in Sydney, went to university in Sydney, and eventually she's migrated to the UK. So you see Australians in all sorts of positions. What is interesting is that there are more British-born people living in Australia than in any other country in the world, other than obviously the UK itself. And there are more British-born people living in Australia than there are in the whole of the European Union. which is an extraordinary thing. So you don't want to underestimate the huge people-to-people links there are between our two countries. Between our governments, I would say there is a relationship of great trust. I think the best word to use here is the word trust. The intelligence relationship between our agencies like ASIS and ASIO and MI6 and MI5 and GCHQ and the Australian Signals Directorate are very intimate and very successful and a very important relationship to both of us. The government-to-government relationship includes our foreign affairs departments sharing cables with each other so we can see what their assessments are of, whatever it is, the situation in South Africa or Venezuela, and they can see what we think is going on in wherever, Cambodia or Vietnam or somewhere. So there's a great synergy and a great trust between our two governments. Economically, this is a relationship that might change a bit with Brexit, but already it's a pretty deep relationship. The UK is the second largest source of all foreign investment, that's foreign direct investment and portfolio investment into Australia, the largest source being the United States. And what is interesting is for all that so many of us have done to build the relationship between Australia and the Indo-Pacific region, and I was the foreign minister for a long time, so I invested a huge amount of my time in that. What is interesting is that Australian businesses, our super funds and so on, head for Britain when it comes to investing. So the UK is the second largest destination of Australian offshore investment. Now, it's only our seventh largest trading partner, and that sounds better than it is, really, because trade with the UK is absolutely dwarfed by trade with China and United States, Japan, Korea, and so on, particularly with North Asia. But the most important economic component of our relationship is the investment relationship, and you can go around London and look at some of the new developments there funded by Lend-Lease or Westfield or AusSuper, all kinds of Australian involvement in Gatwick Airport. I mean, you're all owners of the Australian Future Fund, and Gatwick Airport is significantly owned by the Future Fund. Macquarie Bank owns all sorts of infrastructure assets, and so the list goes on. So my point to you is, and I'll just conclude on this, my point to you is that this is a relationship which is in a sense our oldest relationship. Our first diplomatic mission was in London. The first ambassador called a High Commissioner we ever had was George Reid, who was the Prime Minister, former Premier of New South Wales, and became the High Commissioner in London in 1910. So this ancient, for us Australians, this ancient relationship is still hugely important to us. So with Brexit, when it happened, and it happened, to be frank, unexpectedly, we thought, well, we better get onto the front foot here, secure our equities, and see if we can do even better than that. So when Theresa May was appointed the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull rang her up to congratulate her and put it to her straight away that if you're going to leave the European Union, let us say to you right now that we would be prepared to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. And we've already set up a working group. We can't, of course, enter into formal negotiations before Britain leaves the EU in March 2019, but we can do preliminary work. And during the visit this week of Boris Johnson and Michael Fallon, who is the Defence Secretary, will be having further talks with them about how to take this negotiation forward. Do I think it will be easy? I think it could be relatively easy because of course, the legal systems, the political systems, the language are so similar. The language the same, I suppose one should argue. So similar between our two countries, few different words, are so similar between our two countries, and much more than that. I was going to say more importantly than that, perhaps not more importantly, but beyond that, one would have to say the commitment this country has to liberal and open markets is very much shared by the UK, which was, after all, the author of the whole notion of free trade, coming out of, let us claim, the Scottish Enlightenment for this, or it's debatable. But in any case, it's the home of free trade, intellectually, the UK. Therefore, I think it should be relatively easy for us to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. I think that will help to stimulate still further the economic relationship between our two countries and secure the political relationship. So this is absolutely the last thing I want to say about it. I think the relationship with the UK has in a lot of ways become unfashionable in Australia. For many people, I wouldn't count myself as one of them, but for many people there's been a desire to try to push ourselves away from the UK. I think this is a huge mistake. In international relations, you need all the friends you can get. And you need to leverage all the easy relationships that you can find around the world. We have such a natural and such an easy relationship with the UK. And the UK, of course, doesn't run an empire on which the sun never sets anymore, and it hasn't for just about all of my life. But the UK is still a permanent member of the Security Council, UN Security Council, with a veto. It's a nuclear weapons state. It's the 5th biggest economy in the world. It has huge soft power, a capacity, by that I mean, to influence events in the world. In my view, only the United States has more soft power, and of course it has a lot of hard power to go with it, but only the United States has more soft power than the UK. And here is a country, by the way, that loves us. So if I could use a military term, the relationship with the UK is a huge force multiplier for Australian diplomacy. And I just think we should make the most of it. Always be on the front foot in that relationship. And whether you think Brexit is going to be a great thing for Britain, or whether you think it's a disaster, or more likely you just think, gosh, I wonder how that's all going to work out, which is probably where most people in the UK are, we'll have to wait and see, because we don't know what they're going to negotiate. That country will always be a country of critical importance to us, and only, it would be to put it this way, it would be a major mistake if in Australian foreign policy we didn't try to leverage our very close historic relationship with the UK. It would be a major mistake, because we would be throwing away one of the force multipliers that helps to project our country of just 24 million people and our interests around the world. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on more specific issues if you wish. Thank you.